sole alla collina. Per le campagne non c'è più nessuno. Addio, addio amore, io vado via.
Can you recognize this sound? Think about it. This hand could be yours, cutting potatoes while cooking dinner. But have you ever asked yourself from where are these potatoes coming from? This is Lodo, and together with my colleagues, Aksa, Anna, Bridget, Monta, and Barbara, we are here to tell you the story of the origin of some of these potatoes, of the place in which they are growing up, and of the people putting their dignity at stake to collect them.
Cieli infiniti e volti come pietra, mani incallite ormai senza speranza. Addio, addio amore, io vado via, amara terra mia, amara bella.
We are here in southern Italy, in Sicily. Here, men and women have always cultivated the land. However, this is a bitter land, a hard work. Spending all day under the burning sun, in the harsh and unforgiving land. And then, when you come home, still no money and little food on the table. Lots of Sicilian grandparents spent lots of their life working on this land, but then lots of them went away. It seems that there is no one anymore. But the land remains, and the food remains, so who is taking care of this land? Who is growing our food? Someone took their place, and even if we pretend to consider them as totally different, the story is just repeating itself. In the Italian southern soil repeats the story of migration, of the generations who left and the new people who have arrived to take up the tools of agriculture and toil.
الشمس تضوي حكايا مواسم قرب وشوق وهجر ومرايا.
My name is Aksa Noreen. Welcome to this podcast, where we explore the life, struggles, and resilience of migrants around the world. Today, we turn our focus to the fertile fields of Cassibile, a small town in the southern corner of Sicily, Italy. Cassibile is a small town in the Siracusa region, is known for its fertile soil and rich potato harvest. But behind the golden fields and the promise of fresh produce lies a harsh reality faced by the migrant workers who make this industry possible. Cassibile is not a just charming Italian countryside, but also a crucial hub for one of the region's most demanding agriculture industries, the potato harvest. This area is known for its nutrient rich volcanic soil and favorable Mediterranean climates, making it ideal for potatoes cultivation. However, this agriculture success story often hides the harsh realities faced by the migrants workers who power this industry. Each year, hundreds of seasonal workers come from Africa and Eastern Europe flock to Cassibile in search of employment. These workers are the backbone of the potato harvest, performing the intense manual labor required to plant, tend, and harvest the crops. Despite their vital role, many face harsh conditions, including long working hours inadequate housing and low wage, often well below the legal minimum. Historically, this region has relied on migrants' labor for its agricultural success, but this dependence has also led to widespread exploitation. In recent years, numerous reports have highlighted the difficult living and working conditions faced by these workers, drawing attention to the urgent need for the reform and better enforcement of labor rights. In Cassibile, migrant workers often live in 9 to 12 hours a day for just €50, without safety gear, food, or water provided. At dawn, local bars fill with workers buying supplies to survive the day, while farms and gang masters profit. So do local businesses, bars, shops, phone stores that rely on migrant spending. Yet many locals deny what's happening, ignoring the reality that the local economy depends on the exploitation and refusing to acknowledge either the workers' rights or the community's role. As we investigate deeper into this topic, we will hear the voice of these workers, explore the impact of these challenging conditions, and discuss the effort being made to protect their rights and dignity. Stay tuned for a closer look at the human side of Sicily agriculture success. As we already said, every spring and summer, hundreds of seasonal workers, mostly migrants, arrive in Cassibile. They come with hope, they come with promise of employment. But for over 200 years, many of them have found themselves sleeping in makeshift camps on farmland, often without access to basic sanitation, clean water, or gas, living conditions that are frankly unworthy of any human being. Since 2021, thanks to several fundings of which we will talk in a bit, an hostel has been created to provide seasonal workers with the proper accommodation during the potato harvest. Let's unpack what this is all about. To understand the importance of the Cassibile hostel, we first have to understand what was this supposed to fight against caporalato. That's the Italian term for illegal gang mastering, an illegal yet widespread labor brokerage system where intermediators, caporali, organize transportation, job placement, and payments, often taking a cut from workers' wage. This system thrives in areas where there is a little to no state oversight and where workers fear interaction with authorities due to irregular statutes or lack of support networks. The Cassibile hostel was created not just a place to sleep, but as a strategic response to caporalato. It's part of a border movement driven by both national and European funding to dismantle exploitation and offer real alternatives for migrant laborers. Let's talk about how it works. Workers can access the hostel only after registering with the bilateral Bilateral Territorial Agriculture Agency EBAT in Saracusa. They must hold a valid resident permit and an active employment contract. And while there is a small contribution towards the cost paid by the workers on their employers, most of the funding comes from public sources. The hostel itself is powered by four main pillars of funding. First, we have the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund, known as FAMI. This is where the Super Amy project comes into play. FAMI finance the opening and operation of the hostel, ensuring that the offers services like healthcare, cultural mediation, and social support. Second, there is a National Operational Program on Legality or upon PON Legality, which invested around 1.5 million euros to expand the hostel. This allowed for new housing units to be built and for much needed infrastructure upgrades to happen. Third, the Pawn Inclusion Program, backed by the European Social Fund through a linked project called PIU Super ME. This fund supports for the day-to-day management of the hostel. It's how reception services, healthcare, and legal aid are sustained, often the partnership with NGOs and cooperatives. And finally, the Italian Ministry of the Interior, which allocated 2,42,000 euros for the initial setup, buying equipment, preparing facilities, and getting the projects off the ground. So, what exactly is Super ME? The full name is South Protagonist in Overcoming the Emergency Under Severe Exploitation. It's a mouthful, but the mission is simple to combat unemployment and poor living conditions among migrants workers in agriculture. Launched in 2019 and originally designed to run for 18 months, Super Amy was implemented across southern Italy, including Puglia, Campania, Calabria, Basilicata, and of course Sicily. The Sicilian government signed an agreement with the Ministry of Labor and Social Policies to bring the project to life. The numbers speak volumes. The region of Sicily received over 6.3 million euros in total project funding, with over 5.5 million of that coming from EU sources and the rest as national co financing. But this was not just about building beds and bathrooms. No, the grants explicitly focused on improving health protections for migrants in informal settlements and on promoting long term integration that includes access to social life, legal assistance, and sustainable economic opportunities. And who running all of this on the ground? A partnership known as a temporary association of purpose or a etc. These teams include Passwork, a social enterprise cooperative, and the Saracusa chapter of the Italian Red Cross. They handle everything from meal distribution to health services, culture mediation, and hygiene. Let's go back to those numbers again. Every year, about 400 migrants workers arrive in the province of Saracusa following the seasonal agriculture circuit. These are men and women who have often traveled thousands of kilometers seeking work in Europe food supply chain. Until recently, many of them ended up camping outside the village of Cassibile, exposed to the element without toilets, running water, or cooking facilities. In 2022, a final funding request was approved by the Department of Family, Social Policies and Labor in Sicily, along with the Special Immigration Office. It secured over 1,07,000 euros to cover operational costs for that season, enabling shelter for 80 workers. 80 people may not sound like much, but for those 80, it would mean no more sleeping in the dirt, no more living invisible lives at the edge of society.
Okay, till this point, everything seems to work in favor of the migrant workers. All this system can be hypothetically perfect and functional, but let's analyze together some critical points. To obtain a bed within the hostel, it is asked to provide an identification document. We already know the importance of the capolarato phenomenon in Italy and the significant impact it has on undocumented migrants. So, what if you don't have a document to show at the entrance? Of course, you will be condemned to sleep outside, in precarious and unsanitary conditions, as it was before. And what if sleeping outside is just a warning, a sign with written, "I'm an irregular migrant," making you even identifiable by the police? It is asked also to pay a certain amount of money to sleep inside. What if you are undocumented and consequently you don't have a labor contract and you are exploited and underpaid? Where can you save this money? Here we arrive to the core question. Is the hostel system really going to fight against a capolarato? Since we know that capolarato is going to affect mainly the irregular population, the answer seems to be negative. This system is further marginalizing undocumented migrants and exposing them to major risks, to be identified and to be exploited. Now, let's hear the voice of a friend of mine who kindly agreed to speak with me about what's happening there in this season. He's from Gambia, and he's been working in agriculture in Sicily for a while now. We spoke by phone a few days ago. He told me he didn't start working right away. There was too much rain, and things were chaotic. Contracts weren't ready, and accommodations weren't really arranged. It was really chaos at the beginning, he told me. One of the main challenges was figuring out where to stay. This year, as in the past years, many workers ended up in the ostello, a kind of temporary housing camp made of containers, managed by a cooperative. But staying there wasn't as simple as just showing up. Some workers, initially, preferred to sleep in abandoned houses, or even out in the fields, to avoid the rules. Restrictions on when they could use the kitchen, when they had to be back at night, and especially the cost of the accommodations. When it became clear we had to pay, we were trying to understand what to do. Some of us didn't want to pay, others couldn't. It was raining too much. We were lucky to sleep inside. But it's a container shared by 7 people. 7 people in a container that's meant for 6. There are bunk beds, 1 small table, 1 chair, and a few hangers for our clothes, he said. That's not 120 euros a month place, boy. The rent they were asked to pay was 30 euros per week, about 120 euros per month. And that's for a bed in a crowded container with no privacy and strict curfews. I pay rent in Palermo, he said. Almost the same amount. But I don't share my room with other 6 people. If it was for us, we would rent a nice apartment for 120 euros each. But they don't rent to us. There are hundreds of empty apartments in Cassibile, but locals refuse to rent the migrant workers. Last year, we tried sleeping in some of those empty houses, but the police would always come, he said. This year, things are different, tighter. We see many controls around. Some people were taken to Caltanissetta, to the CPR, the Immigration Detention Center. One brother was even sent back to Cambia. It's too risky now to find another place to stay besides the Ostello. The irony is that the Ostello can only host around 220 people, while many more are arriving for the harvest season. Don't think about this, and they even ask us for money. He told me he refused to pay. I'm not paying 120 euros a month for a place where I'm not even allowed to go back after 10 p.m. It's humiliating. At first, the woman from the cooperative, the one responsible for collecting the rent, would come each week. She always came with 2 or 3 police officers. They asked for money and checked our contracts. I didn't even have contract at first. I only had the ricevuta, but they still let me stay. Eventually, the woman stopped showing up. Maybe it's because some journalists came, he said. Or because Giulia, an activist, spoke with the union, the CGL. But they didn't come talk to us, so I don't really know. In the first few days after arriving, he and others would go to the bar in town each morning, just waiting to be called for work. At first, the jobs were slow to come, but after a few days they started. Eventually, he got a contract, something not everyone receives. Evicting seasonal workers for informal shelters without offering real alternatives is not a solution. Providing just 220 beds in container at the Ostello, at the cost of 120 euros a month, for a workforce that regularly exceeds 700 people, is deeply inadequate. It's a policy of containment, not sport. This approach, marginalizing the very people who are doing the labor that few Italians are willing to do, reflects a wider pattern in how migration and labor are managed in Italy. This is not just inefficient, it is structural racist. It criminalizes those who are essential to the agricultural economy, while protecting the status quo that exploits them. One of the most glaring failures in the refusal to address the reality that many workers are undocumented, and that their only path to legal residence is through an employment contract. But instead of putting pressure on employers to issue contracts and assure safe conditions, the only pressure applied is on the workers themselves. Police raids, detentions, and eviction won't fix a broken system. What's needed is political will from local institutions, from the state, from EU, to recognize these workers not as a problem to be managed, but as people who deserve rights, protections, and a dignified life. Until then, what happens each spring in Cassibile will continue to be a stain on our agricultural system and a mirror reflecting the failures of a migration policy in Italy.
Addio, addio amore, io vado via, amara terra mia, amara bella.
You know, from what we've heard so far, it seems that our current economic and immigration systems seem to view migrant labourers as mere manpower to be exploited and not essential workers to be supported. The labourers know they are essential and that sooner or later somebody will have to pick these potatoes, because without the labourers, the potatoes that we take for granted on our dinner table will lie unharvested and rotting in the soil. However, even though the workers know they are needed and that this should give them some bargaining power, it seems that in reality they are in a very powerless position. If they speak up about the injustice of their situation, then it could actually make things worse for them, like running the risk of losing work or even make their physical situation more dangerous. This is where several advocacy groups and organisations are trying to help. In some ways, they provide practical help like food, clothing, money, and shelter. But even more importantly for the long term, they are helping the voices of the workers to be heard, to help them in their self-determination, while at the same time doing this in a way that also keeps them safe. NGOs, associations, and unions like the Arci Porco Rosso Arci Spazio Ciao, Di.Gi, Rete Antirazzista Catanese, and MEDU, community advocates and local churches and congregations are all pushing back in many different and effective ways. In nearby Siracusa, the parishes of Maria Madre of the Church and Bosco Muniti both help documented and undocumented workers with practical, on-the-ground, day-to-day assistance. These include safe accommodation and the collection and distribution of donations of drinking water, food, blankets, clothes, underwear, shoes, and hygiene products. This is only part of their help, because through their example, they are also helping to challenge a lot of the racism that's present in the area. Their actions send a clear message to the local communities about the importance of acknowledging the common dignity of all. This is a really important action, to stand up like this, because many local inhabitants are living within a climate of hate, and they've organised protests insisting that the labourers of Cassibile aren't wanted there. On the initiative of some of those locals, they collected petitions against the migrants with more than 800 signatures, and they sent them to the President of the region and of the Republic, complaining about the construction of camps and temporary accommodations. These are the sort of reactions that are created out of fear and ignorance, because in reality, without the workers, a large part of their own economy would collapse. Arci is a network of clubs and associations where people meet every day. They share their ideas and passions, have fun and work for a fairer world. The groups and organisations that work within Arci share a commitment to the promotion of culture, sociality, rights, solidarity, participation, and democracy. One of these groups is active in Palermo, Porco Rosso, and it helps to combat racism and also provide practical support for migrant and seasonal workers. The community of Porco Rosso believes that building walls and excluding people is the wrong way to face the current crisis, and that the time has come to fight racism with courage and creativity. They seek to define and challenge the deep and entrenched reasons for the deprivation of rights of increasingly large segments of the population. At the heart of their commitment to migrant and seasonal workers is a common belief that the right of each person to build their own life path wherever they want, of the right to a fair and proportional remuneration for the work done, and of the right to be free from need. These are not individual battles, but they are linked by a strong common bond. This is an important statement because it acknowledges the need to work with and not just for marginalised people, because they are an important voice in their own liberation. The most powerful advocacy is when people who are often silenced are able to speak and to be heard. MEDU is an organisation which aims to provide healthcare and socio-legal support to seasonal migrant workers who are often victims of labour exploitation and living in vulnerable conditions in agricultural areas of southern Italy. These guys, again, one of their most important aspects of their work is to counteract racism and to help inform the local society and the national and regional institutions about living and working conditions of migrants working in agriculture, and to encourage more acceptance and tolerance, but also to call for better protection measures for workers. Good afternoon, Anna, and thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to ask you to give a little background into your work, how you came to advocacy, and what are some of the things you do. Maybe you could share a story or experience that you won't ever forget, maybe one that changed how you see your advocacy work or made you more determined to continue what you do.
Hi, Bridget. Thank you for the questions. First of all, I work in a drop-in where any kind of document or undocumented person can come and ask for support. And it's a safe space where we work with people and not for people. One of the stories that I feel like sharing in this moment is the story of a person that arrived to the drop-in, and this person was undocumented and obviously arrived to ask how to regularize themselves. And there are many ways in which you can do it if you have the possibility. sometimes it's not possible. And this time there were very few possibilities that this person had. So one of the ways where you can ask when you can try to regularize yourself is to ask for a sanitary permit. So basically, the reason you're inside of this country, it's because on your country of origin, you don't have the possibility to have the medical assistance that you need. So to go through this path, you need many kind of certificates and visits. And so we were starting just to book all these visits and try to collect all the documents that we needed to try to apply for this kind of permit. In the meanwhile of this process, unfortunately, it was caught by the police without documents. In Italy, that means that you are directly brought inside of a police station. You pass the night there, and then you need to do a visit where you are kind of certified as legit to go inside of the detention center. And in the meanwhile that you're brought inside of the detention center, you wait for a judge to confirm this imprisonment. This process can last a maximum of 48 hours. And in these 48 hours, me and other people, we actively try to find a way to make him name a lawyer, a trusted lawyer that could help him, and to try to find the hospital and the doctors that would have certified him as a person that could be inside of a detention center, so that he didn't have infectious illnesses. And so in this process, I put myself in contact with all the people in the network that could help me out. And I was amazed by how this network worked. There are doctors, not just social workers and activists, but there are as well doctors, mediators, people that you wouldn't imagine that actually activated themselves in order to find a way to help us out. So in no time, we found a person inside of the hospital where he would have been confirmed to be detained, that actually succeeded in tell him to nominate a trusted lawyer. And unfortunately, they brought him inside of the CPR center. But in no time, the doctors that met him just one time sent basically a letter to the CPR centers in which they said that they had him as a patient and they needed to do more further visits to certify him as a person that could stay inside a detention center. And they asked for a psychiatric visit as well. And all this to just realize that there is a network around me that works with me and that didn't make me feel alone in this situation and didn't make him feel alone in this situation. Unfortunately, he had to stay inside of this center for some days, but every person that could help actually helped. And the brothers that are now inside the CPR centers actually helped him to put in contact with us. And finally, they, after some visits with the doctors and the psychiatric and the psychiatrician, actually certified him as non-idoneous for the detention, and so they let him out, and we went to take him outside of the CPR and brought him back to his family, and that was, I think, one of the most important moment probably for my advocacy work, because I actually succeeded, and that doesn't happen much, unfortunately.
Wow, Anna, thank you so much for sharing such a deeply personal story, but one that really shows the power of a network, the power of a whole group of people that want to work together, and including the advocacy and rights of the people involved themselves. And good luck with your future work. I guess that leads us all to wonder, what is even just one practical thing that any listener of this podcast can do to help support these advocacy organisations and how we can all help to make the situation of migrant and seasonal workers better and safer. I guess the first and most obvious thing would be to consider donating to one of the organisations that are established and who have a strong opportunity to make change. Sometimes there might be a call for particular items, such as those we mentioned before, and sometimes money is more effective. Even a regular donation, no matter how small, could make a big difference to a lot of lives. But definitely, I think the most important thing that comes of all of what we've heard so far, the thing that all of us can do, is to get informed and find out the truth of how our food seems to magically appear in the markets and city stores, and to understand the struggles of the lives of those who harvest it for us. Sometimes the hardest people to talk to can be when our own family and friends, especially when they say and believe negative things about migrant workers that they may have heard in the media, but they're not anything like the reality in the fields. What better place to start your own advocacy and support than around the family dinner table, eating your potatoes and discussing the truth about where they came from and how they got here. Around the potato farms of Cassibile, it is said that rice continue to rot like fruit in the sun, and from what we've heard so far, it seems that this is a fair description of the situation for seasonal workers. In the final part of our podcast, we turn our attention to some of the main human rights that are at issue here and the ways in which local, regional, national and international institutions and systems are failing to protect even the most basic rights of these much needed yet marginalised people.
درب السفر بعيد يا أرض الصارم مرة مكتوب الفرقان.
Hello everyone, this is Muntaha Natah, and right now we're gonna touch base more on the legal perspective of this topic. So as you know, these workers mostly come from Africa and Eastern Europe and travel thousands of miles, often leaving behind families and communities in search of better economic opportunities. However, what they find in Cassibile is far from the dream of a better life. So let's dig deep into this from a legal perspective. The UN has a legally binding document called the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of Their Families, which was adopted in 1990. So it says migrant workers have the right to fair working conditions, access to housing, healthcare, dignity, and protection from exploitation. So where is the issue here? The issue is Italy never ratified this convention, which means that those protections aren't enforced in Italy. And in places like Cassibile, you see exactly what that leads to. There are multiple violations of basic human rights, so it's not just about housing, it's not just about labor problem. So for example, we have in this convention Article 25, which says all migrant workers must be treated equally in wage and working conditions. This is not actually happening in reality. We also have Article 28, which is right to health. So even undocumented workers are actually entitled to emergency medical care and access to health services that are necessary for preserving life. But in Cassibile, none of that is actually guaranteed. Also, in Article 43, we have access to housing on equal footing with nationals, but again, this is not actually happening. And finally, we have Article 7, which guarantees the right to be free from discrimination, but unfortunately, as mentioned earlier, institutions are absent and exploitation is present. So basically, the law is there, but the reality is lawless. In Cassibile, The reality for many migrant laborers, particularly those without regular documents, includes recruitment through informal networks, often linked to caporalato, which I will speak about more later, a lack of written contracts or proof of employment, no formal access to grievance mechanisms in cases of abuse or wage theft. So that is pretty much the case on the ground. However, in addition to the UN Convention, there's also some conventions by the International Labour Organization, the ILO, such as the Convention on Forced Labour, Convention number 105 on abolition of forced labour, another convention on migration for employment, and other more, which Italy is actually a member of the ILO and actually has ratified several of these conventions. So these instruments altogether obligate states to eliminate forced labor, ensure equal treatment in employment, and provide safeguards for migrants, including those who are in irregular situations. In Italy, the caporalato system is a very present phenomenon. This is why the Italian government has actually introduced Law 199 of 2016 to criminalize this caporalato system and protect the exploited workers. While this was a step forward, legally speaking, but the implementation in places like Cassibile remains inconsistent because of the insufficient labor inspections and lack of institutional presence. So this makes the access to justice a major challenge for these migrants. Even when workers experience abuse, they cannot actually go and report it or seek legal solutions in whatever way possible, because they might fear that they do not have residence permits or legal documentation. They might be unaware of their rights, or it may also be a language barrier and they don't have access to interpretation services. And some fear the fact that they might be blacklisted by their employers. So if we're talking about Italian law itself, it actually provides formal protections for migrant workers on a national and regional level. So Italian law has criminal penalties for labor exploitation, for access to emergency healthcare, decent housing, and so on, but that is not really present on the ground. These rights that are protected by the Italian law are actually codified in several key laws. For example, we have the Consolidated Immigration Act, which is legislative decree number 286 of 1998, which guarantees equal treatment in employment for regular migrants and outlines the basic protections that even for those without documents. So also when it comes to the workers' rights to physical safety and health, that is protected in legislative decree number 81 of 2008, which applies to all workers, regardless of their immigration status. More recently, we have the Decree Law number 73 of 2021, which aims to strengthen labor inspection and fund better reception facilities for seasonal workers. Yet, no such improvements have actually reached Cassibile, which is the area that remains without basic infrastructure like shelters, medical services, or official oversight during harvest season. So in short, Cassibile exposes a strong disconnection between Italy's legal framework and its real-world application. So the law exists indeed, but they are not being enforced properly. This isn't just a gap in legislation, it's actually a systemic failure to act, which leaves migrant workers exploited and unprotected.
Sole alla valle, sole alla collina, per le campagne non c'è più nessuno. Addio, addio amore, io vado via, amara terra mia,
what we have seen in Cassibile isn't a glitch in the system. It is a system where economic gain rests on human exploitation. Migrant workers power Sicily's agriculture, yet remain invisible in policy, disposable in practice, and criminalized when they demand basic rights. Despite EU funding, Italian laws, and international conventions, the reality is this. In the Italian system, it's quite impossible to obtain documents, and this is feeding the exploitation machine. Beyond politicians' speeches and legal provisions, protection is absent and exploitation is the norm. Public funds are supposed to build safer alternatives like the Cassibile hostel, and they do actually help the minoritarian category of the ones having documents. However, the hostel should be supposed to fight against capolarato, that we know is a practice taking advantage on the vulnerable and precarious situations of undocumented migrants. This is why the Cassibile project is failing its goal, leaving the majority of the undocumented workers sleeping outside the hostel, exposed to the blackmail of the caporali and to the violence and repression of the police. We heard from those living it, the backbreaking hours, the constant fear, and the hopeless bureaucracy. And we heard from those fighting it, local church parishes and NGOs like the Arci, Porco Rosso, and Medu, and advocates pushing back against apathy and power and allowing the voices of the migrant workers to be heard. Because as long as their rights remain on paper and not in practice, the story will repeat itself, season after season. If you're listening to this from a distance, this might feel like someone else's problem, but it really isn't. Every bag of potatoes harvested in Cassibile has a human story behind it, one that might involve exploitation or courage. And if you're close, if you're in Sicily or in the EU generally, then this is a test of personal and political will, of what kind of agricultural system we're willing to accept, of how much silence we'll tolerate when lives are on the line. That's Cassibile, and this is the story. Thanks for tuning in and catch you in the next episode.